Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana M.A. and
Jackie Sanders. We're two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
We talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday.
On today's episode, we're really excited to welcome artist Taylor White. Welcome, Taylor.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So we look forward to discussing your career as a muralist, your ever-evolving creative process, how you developed your unique painting style, as well as recording a bonus segment on income streams and pricing for our podcast supporters at levelupartist.com.
But real quick, before we dive in, let's go ahead and share a little bit about your background for our listeners who may not be familiar with your incredible work. So Taylor White is an American painter and muralist whose work combines refined techniques of classical training with bright, unexpected color choices born from the residue of street art and pop culture. She was raised in Raleigh, North Carolina, and educated at the Savannah College of Art and Design, completing her BFA in illustration. Upon graduating, she began contributing her efforts to acclaimed Oslo-based advertising agency Tradeoffs, as the first and only full-time illustrator hired in a Norwegian agency at the time. 3 years later, her choice to pursue painting brought her to Australia, where she found a new kind of success, traversing the textures of urban environments, furnishing the streets and galleries of Melbourne with her uniquely haunting, expressive portraits of furlough youth. She has exhibited internationally from Melbourne to Berlin, and has worked for Google Fiber to create one of the largest public-facing augmented reality murals in the world. In 2021, she completed Raleigh's second augmented reality mural, 8-Bit to 5G, a tribute to the future of gaming and esports in the city of Raleigh. Clients have included Google Fiber, Hyatt Hotels, Microsoft, Lululemon, AC Hotels by Marriott, and Kane Reality Corp. A very extensive resume and very, very impressive.
I always like to fluff it.
Hey, there's no fluffing. These are all real. I especially like that 8-bit mural that you have. It's not far from us at ArtSpace.
Oh yeah, thank
Probably
you.
Seen it, bazillion times.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that was the formal introduction. But Taylor, how would you describe your work to someone who has never seen it before?
Oh my gosh. I have a mixed background in fine art and illustration, so I think it's like a sort of a unique blend of both sensibilities. So you'll see some like illustrative graphic storytelling qualities, and then like the like painterly fine art kind of renderings. So it's kind of nice, a nice hybrid.
It's semi-realistic. I mean, would you say like there's body parts, if you will, like realistic, figurative elements kind of mixed in with some more abstract ones?
Yeah, I mean, I think the things that attract me when I'm painting, like, I mean, I am very gestural when I apply the paint, but I'm also attentive to fine detail, and I think I strive for capturing certain details in like forms and lights and everything. And so like the success comes when I'm able to get that right, but also have the painterly quality still shine forward. Like my brushstrokes are very like individual or individuated when you look up closely, but then when you step back, it's just kind of like coalesces into this cohesive image. So
yeah, and that's definitely one thing that I really admire about your work. It's very dynamic. There's a lot of energy and a lot of movement, and it's definitely not a cookie cutter application of either of those two very different styles, to where it's a very unique and recognizable style.
thank you. I'm glad.
And especially seeing it at such different scales as well, which we'll talk about a bit later. But I mean, having smaller, let's say under a foot-sized paintings in a gallery up to large scale murals on the side of a building. And that's a very tricky thing to balance as an artist of, okay, which pieces work on which scale, which is the constant balance. But
Absolutely.
but looking back to the beginning of your career, kind of your origin story, so to speak, when did you feel like you could first call yourself a proper artist?
You'll need to define the context a little bit more. Like proper is in terms of like professionally legitimate, or proper in terms of like, I don't know.
I guess we say proper art because the word artist means so many different things.
Yeah, exactly.
People. And so I guess whatever it means to you, I think a lot of the times as creatives, when we are all kids. They're like, oh, like she's like 5, 6 years old. Like you're so creative. You're a little artist. But there's
Yeah.
always that pivot point of, okay, wait, I can and am going to make this an intentional part of my life and whatever that
Yeah.
looks like. So what was that pivot point, do you feel like, for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I've always been uh I've always been highly skilled for my level of development, um, like my entire life. So it's always like, back in kindergarten, elementary school, like they're like, well, don't forget me when you're a famous artist and all of that stuff. And that kind of tends to go to your head a little bit when you're youngin'. Um, but like, everybody's got this, there's artistry in everything, and everybody can bring that if they're gifted, like bring that into their vocation wherever they can apply it. But like in the traditional, in the most direct sense, it's like there are people who are like, I'm an artist and I really want to make a living as an independent sole proprietor. And at a certain point, you have to like make a decision to either let that go or enter
Right,
into,
makes
like,
sense.
or lean into it. And so like, I mean, I think for me, it was like, the choice between doing commercial illustration, which I did straight out of college, and continuing along that path, or being like, no, I've got what it takes to like run my own business, and be consistently paid for it. And so like, I think once I started to be able to do that, that's when I could call myself like a quote unquote proper artist.
Yeah, and there's definitely that balance of the modern artist, that entrepreneurship aspect,
Hmm.
which I think is what you're speaking to. It's different from being a working under another company or working the 9 to 5, but having
Hmm.
that entrepreneur mindset of taking ownership of your work, your style, and maybe working in multiple commercial facets, but it's always you're working as an independent entity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like lots of artists will have like, well, like they'll have their name and the stuff that they put forth like as their fine art practice or whatever, but they'll also be working for like Vans or something like that. They'll have like a full-time job as a designer or some other kind of vocation at the same time. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I think sometimes I admire that. I'm like, man, it'd be great to like like go into an office and do my design work and then turn it off, that'd be
Yeah.
awesome. But then like, I mean, a lot of the artists that I kind of came up alongside, would end up eventually going into something a little more stable.
Mm.
Um, but then like, I think that was just like something that I didn't feel didn't feel called towards, it was just kind of like, the mural thing was starting to pick up. And I was like, well, I'm getting paid to enough to like live comfortably, and it's consistent enough. Like the requests are consistent enough. And so like, I'm just gonna keep doing this and then give myself a little bit of space to, you know, do other things that aren't art. So
I love that you had the confidence like pretty early on to just be like, I'm just gonna give this a shot and see what happens and give yourself a good old fair chance to try it as an independent. Because honestly, being a self-supported or self-employed artist is not for the faint of heart.
oh sure,
I
sure
mean,
not.
yeah, there's no
Yeah.
consistent paycheck. So
Mm-mm.
it is unless you have a support system of some sort, then it can be really, really tough. But I do want to ask you, kind of diving back into your history a little bit, how did you develop your unique style and painting technique? Like, where did that is that something that started at SCAD or some of it started earlier on, or where did that
I
come?
actually don't think my painting style as it is known today developed until like way later, like 2015. I think like the first time I like kind of developed the paint stroke technique that I still use like was like 2015, which was like 5 years into my career, or 5 years into my like independent artist career. So before that, there's like a lot of like feeling around and trying to figure out what works and learning how to use the tools. Like I didn't know how to use like when I first started, I didn't know how to like paint with color, you know what I mean? Like I was doing like black and white illustrations, and then sort of scaling, and I was messing around like doing digital work like really early on and stuff like that. But then I was also messing around with painting on a larger scale, but like I didn't have the bandwidth to be like painting on a big scale and also painting with color.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah,
did
that's a
like
lot of variables at one time. So is
yeah.
that just like practice and trial and error, or
Practice
do you have any
100%.
mentors? Yeah.
Yeah, I learned quickly how to like use spray paint. And then that was a little bit of a learning curve too, but then yeah, I don't know, it just kind of like you just keep doing it and it clicks in eventually.
Yeah, plus
Yeah.
things like mural paints, not all of them can be mixed as well, because I know other muralists that will use house paints and they're like,
Mhm.
you can't mix them. You have to get it from the store or the colors go dull, as
Yeah, it is
opposed to
quite hard to
some of
mix.
the
I mean,
higher
you
quality stuff.
can I can and have and do mix house paint, but you're gonna drive yourself crazy if you think you're gonna try to be precise about it. It's just kind of like
Mm.
if I need the value to be different or if I need the hue to be different, like I can mix house paint and I'll get that effect. It just won't be like the specific precise color that I'm looking for, but placed
Mhm.
next to another color, it will relate. You know what I mean?
Enough.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I've done plenty of
In a
murals where I'm
bind.
like, I just need like I don't have the budget to go out and buy a bunch of new paints. I'm just going to mix all the colors that I have in my studio, and
Hope for the best.
the colors look brownish and gross, but like up on the wall at scale, when viewed from afar, the eye kind of fills in the gaps.
Like
So
perfect skin tone.
yeah, I mean, perfect. Well, I don't know what that means, but
Acceptable from a large scale mural
acceptable. Yeah, I mean,
standpoint.
if you like, there are ways to do it. The quality of the work could probably have been improved if I had had a better paint, I guess. I don't know,
And budget.
but it worked.
Yeah, I think that's always that fine dance in any creative process too.
Mhm.
It's that balance of using what you have and making it work. And that's part of the creative process is being
Mhm.
creative with your tools. Where, okay, yes, in a perfect world with unlimited budget and all of the perfect materials at your fingertips, debatably you could say, oh, then I'd have a better outcome.
Yeah,
But that's part of the creative process and part of the magic of being resourceful. I think that's a huge skill set that creatives have is being
I
resourceful with
agree.
what they have.
Yeah. I mean, it is true in a sense that you get what you pay for, but also like having the biggest and most expensive tools and materials doesn't always necessarily translate to better art. Sometimes, but not always.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus it can cut into your profit. And that's
Yeah,
another thing to
it
keep an
sure
eye on.
does.
It's like if your painting budget is
Mhm.
this, your labor is this, it's like, do you
Yeah,
cut into your labor costs to get better paint?
yeah. But it does reduce my tax burden at the end of the year, so
Well, there's that.
There you
there's a
go.
silver lining.
Clearly from an entrepreneur's mind, always thinking the dreaded finances and taxes.
Yeah, that's the
But
bonus section.
yeah. But speaking of murals though, what does that kind of timeline and process look like for you for any large scale mural process? Some of our listeners, whether they've had experience with murals or are thinking about getting into it, can
Mhm.
you share a little bit of what that process looks like for a mural project?
Sure. Yeah, well, typically I will have somebody reach out to me by email or DM, which I generally prefer email because I sometimes don't check my Instagram DMs. Just FYI. But yeah, so I'll get an email request for somebody, and these days it's usually like a interior designer who's working with a developer, so it's a little bit longer, like a longer process. Um, but like just typically it'd be like somebody say like, oh hey, we have this, we're X business, we have this wall, we want this like this is the concept we're looking for, and we love your work, blah 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 blah. Can you provide us a quote? And so then I'll get I'll have a couple of questions I'll ask, like what size is the wall? Is it indoors or outdoors? Like how is it accessible? Is it above a bar? Like that kind of stuff.
Mm.
And if the wall is constructed already, I'll go and do a site visit, like take a look at it because it's better for me to like you could tell me like the measurements, but I can't visualize that. So like I'll have to go take a
Mhm.
look at it and see actually how big it actually is. Um, and then I'll take, pictures and all kinds of stuff, and then I'll go back and calculate my price, which will be a combination of like price per square foot market rate versus like what it would actually take to make it worth my while.
Mhm.
Which is kind of a luxury of being at the stage that I am. Um, is being able to factor like how much do I actually want for this project,
Mhm. Mhm.
And so like, projects that I don't want get higher prices.
Yeah,
And so
but
like
there's
it was like sometimes if I get and so then if they accept it, then I'm like, awesome, like at least I made 1.5 to 2 times what I would have normally charged for it.
yeah,
But
you kind of have to do that morale increase too of like
well, yeah, it's like if
if
I
it
think this is going to be a client that's open minded and like wants to let me have some freedom, then like I factor that in, or if I think they're going to be very particular and they don't know what they want, but they know what they don't want, then I'm like, okay, that's going to be like more money. So, and then of course, like I do on the back end, like honor the fact that they're paying me more. So like I don't act like I honor their requests and like so I if I do charge more money, then I don't get to have an attitude with them, even if they're a pain. So
That's hilarious.
so there is there's a little bit of a trade-off there. But so like I quote them and then say they accept it and they think awesome. There's a contract signing process that's very important. And then I'll take like a design deposit up front, which covers the design process. And I usually take that in full payment up front just because it's easier. And then the design process is like a back and forth process with the client. So like I'll just say, here's my idea, like, and then they'll just say like we love it, or like, oh, we like it, but it's not like, it's not like blank enough, and then I'll just take it back and forth. And so like sometimes it'll be a long process and sometimes it'll be really quick and easy. And then we schedule the installation once. Like I do work with a lot of new construction, so it's like the building has to be built and the finish work has to be in. So that just depends on the timing. But if the building's already built, then I'll just be like, yeah, I'm gonna go out and paint it. And sometimes it takes I think probably a week to 2 weeks on average to put it up. So did I leave anything out? You can ask me follow-up questions.
No, this is great. This is fantastic because it definitely helps with the timeline of things versus say you're working with a small business owner directly where it's like, are you available, in September? Yeah, I'll be there this weekend, boom, done. If you're
Yes,
working
it's
with
much more casual with small business owners.
Exactly, where you can say, here's the deposit, give me the deposit, I'll get started, boom, boom, give me the rest when you finish. With these, there are so many other layers and so many other people involved. And the timelines, like, oh, there was a delay in construction, it rained, they couldn't finish, like you never know, and it just keeps moving. But I love the idea how you mentioned you do take the design fee up front because let's say that project goes down, well, at least you got paid for something. But I am curious about one part of the process. When you're talking about them, about the design, sure, maybe perhaps like, and now again, you've done this enough that they can see your portfolio and see the work that you do. But I'm trying to think too of, some of our listeners maybe on the emerging side of things. But are you doing more like physical or digital sketches when you're starting that conversation, assuming they're not necessarily familiar with your work, but say you have a picture of the wall, like are you just kind of sketching on top and then showing that to them? And
yeah, my work process is almost entirely digital these days because it's just so much quicker. So I can I'll usually before they sign anything, I'll offer like a mood board or a back of napkin kind of thing, which if they're less familiar with my work, I can show them that I can ideally they've done the research before they've asked me, but I'll just be like, this is kind of the idea that I have or the vibe that I'm going for, and offer that to them, and then they'll be like, yeah, we love that, and then I'll go into it with some rough sketches. I like to in the process it depends on what approach I'll do, whether I draw something out or collage images together or whatever, just kind of depends on how quick I need to iterate the idea, but I like to use all kinds of tools at my disposal. I'm pretty good at Photoshop. I've been using it since high school. So I'll just draw it there, or Procreate, the iPad program, which is very popular and very useful. So yeah.
wait, do you ever use Fresco?
I don't know Fresco actually.
Oh, okay. All right. We can talk more, but Fresco is like the Procreate version of Adobe. So you can start in Fresco, open Photoshop on your laptop, and the files are there.
Oh, that's great. I just use AirDrop to go back and forth between the Procreate
and you can export it with all your layers.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
You can
I'll
export
let you
you can export to I think Procreate does have cross compatibility with Photoshop because you can actually export a PSD file from there. But then it's also the only drawback to it is if I bring it back into it, sometimes the file is too large and it crashes Procreate. So
I'll let you
that's
investigate
a bit of a pain.
Fresco.
Yeah, I mean, I've got Creative Suite. If it's in Creative Suite,
it is in
then
Creative Suite.
I'll check it out.
Oh yes, it is.
Yeah.
Oh yes, it is. Because I can be sorry, we'll get back to the questions, I promise. But I can be in Fresco, sketch something, migrate it over to Illustrator, vectorize it, and then go
Mhm.
over to Photoshop and finish something or use it for something else. So it's like they can talk to each other, but I don't have to airdrop anything. They're all in the
It's
cloud, the creative cloud. So I can
See,
go
I
between
think
the
that's the
program.
missing link in my workflow, probably. So I'll
Anyways,
check it
I'll
out.
let
But
you
like, you know,
investigate.
Procreate has excellent like response, like brush responsiveness, and they have like you can download brush packages from like um, like Caravaggio or whatever. And
Yeah.
it'll be like because I've done there's a project that I just finished that's not installed yet, but like I did that entirely in Procreate using like a like Albrecht Dürer brush pack. And it looks
Nice.
freaking awesome. So but maybe I mean, I've got like my Cintiq and everything. I've got all the tools. Like every tool is great for its own use.
Yep. I'll let you go
And
down that rabbit
sometimes,
hole, Beth.
yeah, I'll
But
check it out. That'd be fun.
yeah, might be worth
Always good.
exploring. But one question
Always
that I
like learning
have
new
is
tools.
like we're talking about the design is how much does the client's input affect it? Like, can they go, oh, I don't like that color palette. Can you change it and use these colors? And you're like, I don't use those colors. Like, is
Mm.
it ever, or do you have like enough creative freedom to just be like, no, that's not happening?
Uh, yeah, they have. I mean, they have plenty of. Every client has the right to make whatever request they want, and if I don't like it, I'll push back, and but I'll have to like reason why. I was like, I can't be like, no, I don't use those colors. It's like I can use any color, but I could just be like, there's a reason that I chose this palette and blah blah blah. Like I run into that with pink a lot, like because I could use like pink, but some clients think it's too something. Like I don't know. Like I don't like the pink. Like, well, lots of people like the pink, but all right, you don't like the pink, so we'll change it. But that's it depends. Like most clients I work with are very easygoing and whatever, like they hire me because they don't have the ideas. So I present the ideas and they're like, that's awesome. But some are more like controlling, which is fine.
They
And I
get
think
the
that all
extra
goes,
fee.
yeah, that goes back to I think the pricing that you mentioned of
Mhm,
especially having that experience, you can kind of probably tell up front who may be a little bit more in control or want to be in control. And so
mhm.
you unfortunately probably have learned from experience there's one or two projects of feeling maybe you weren't getting paid enough for XYZ, or when you're building your reputation of then knowing, okay, if I were to do this again, I would want to be charging more.
Well, yeah, I mean, my contract changes every time I have a project because there's always something that I'm like, oh, that's not in there. I need to put that in there. And so there are safeguards against like clients that are overworking you, but luckily, like
Mhm.
I don't really have to enforce those very often. Like the biggest one would be like if like change requests, like
Mhm.
it would be like an option to modify. It's like if this is the outline of our agreement, this is the scope of the work that we agreed to. If you have anything to add to that, it will incur an additional cost.
Mm.
And I've never
Okay.
had to enforce it. Since I have put that in my contract, I've never had to enforce it. So you just have to like energetically kind of put that into your you know scope, and then people are like, oh, you know what you're talking about. I have to
Official.
respect your time and blah blah blah. So
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing with contracts. We actually have podcast episodes talking about the importance of contracts,
mhm,
especially for some artists who may be emerging or new to maybe they've never done a mural before, so they kind of like diminish the value that they are bringing to the
yeah,
table. But I think a contract is it's so important. I mean, it's of course establishes the set of like how the relationship is going to go. It legitimizes, of course, the value you're bringing
hmm,
and educates the other party on how this process looks like. And this is what the workflow is. We're not just
yeah,
like winging this process because they might also not know that like 35 revisions is unacceptable. Like,
hmm,
okay. And you can, of course, also decide when, okay, they're truly being maybe too opinionated or
hmm,
overbearing versus,
hmm,
okay, technically this revision has a cost.
hmm.
They've been a great client and super awesome. So you're not going to charge them for it. Like you can also choose to enforce.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it's like anything. Most people are reasonable.
Yeah.
But I also will say it's like if you devalue yourself, like if you come to the table with like this insecurity of like, I just need to get the work, then you're gonna get taken advantage of. And it's not because they're like predatory. It's just like you bring that, like that's what you're presenting. And so people kind of have the idea that they can just make these requests of you that you might not feel comfortable with, but you haven't told them up front who you are and like what you're about. So having a contract like doesn't make you a like you really don't have to have like a FU attitude about it. You just have to say like these are the terms and like we're entering into a working agreement together and like I'm gonna respect your terms, you're gonna respect my terms. So and then it's very like happy go lucky after that, you know?
Yeah, honestly, I think it helps with the gray area. Like most
Mhm.
people like structure and understanding this is like how this is going to work. This is how that's going to work. It's the
Mhm.
gray area where it gets messy. So you as
Mhm.
the artist, if you establish that up front, it just makes it a better experience for everyone
Mhm. And I
involved.
think clients are more comfortable too, like knowing that you know, like you clearly know what you're doing and you have your terms and like there's no ambiguity. And if they are much more respectful in that and much more like attentive too, to be like, oh yeah, like are we, you know, are we asking too much? Because this might cost something. It's like they take into account like their budget too and their
Right.
kind of
Especially as
whatever.
you deal with businesses. I mean, they're used to
Mhm.
the world of contracts. Artists may
Yeah.
be a little shy about it, but I am curious with, of course, we're talking about all these things you've had to add to your contracts over time and learning experiences. But with large scale murals, what is a challenge that you feel like you've had to overcome with painting large scale murals that you didn't expect? And how did you overcome it?
I think the most unexpected challenge was the interpersonal challenge of painting. Like I think you know, when you're an artist, you're kind of like up in your own space and you really need like your little orb of focus and everything. And when you're painting large scale in public, like people want to talk to you and they don't care if you're busy and they may not even notice if you're actually like working. It does not occur to them that you're like actually doing something very labor intensive and focus intensive. So they'll be like, hey, you know, like come down off your lift and answer these like one of three questions that I know it's going to be. You know, it's like, what's that going to be? Are you working on that yourself? How long is it going to take? And or like, are you getting paid? You know, and like a lot of
Right, you
those
don't
times, like people are like I am present enough to know that it's like people aren't asking the questions because they really want to know the answer to the question. They're trying to engage, but they don't have any more elevated framework for engaging with you. You know, so it's just like, oh, what's that? Like,
it's the
you
low
know,
hanging fruit questions. Like they just
kind of. They just kind of want to be like they see something and they're drawn to it and they want to be a part of it, but they're kind of like idiotic about how they do it.
uh-huh.
And so like I in the past like in the past I still have trouble because I'm just like, God, leave me the hell. Like it seems so like it occurs to me as so disrespectful, but I know that it's not, you know?
Mhm.
So in the past, I have been I have been quite unpleasant to people who approach me in that way. But the problem is that they come away with it that as an impression of you. So
Mhm.
like I could be like you're like you know I can think all day long that they're out of line and inappropriate and everything, but if I'm like if I shout at them, then they're gonna think I'm a total a-hole, and that's gonna stick, you know.
You ever put on
So
headphones?
I have yeah, it
Like
doesn't
the
make it.
big
I put on the biggest headphones that I own, and it still doesn't always keep people at bay, you
You
know?
ever put signs
all the
up
way
and like
down?
yeah, put like signs
I've
up.
like literally tried all the things, but and it sometimes works, but it just doesn't always work, and that's like, I had an occasion where like I had like barriers up, like cones and tape and everything,
Oh.
and people would climb over it to like, and so I would like barriers up. I'd be like work like close to the wall with my headphones on, like actually in the throes of working, and people would like climb over and like
Oh my
live at me, and
god.
like I have that. I mean, that is really out of line, and I think it is deserving of a reaction when that kind of thing happens.
Yeah, that's
But
like a
you know,
safety hazard at that
yeah, I mean,
point.
and like I had
Mhm.
like I was like a guy, like this one particular occasion was like a guy like in a motorcycle vest and stuff like that. And I'm like, he comes up in my blind spot, like over and I'm just like, I kind of just like flip and lose it on him. And like, he's like,
Uh-huh.
oh, like, I just wanted to take a picture. And I'm like,
Mm.
get the fuck out of my space. Like, go away, get out, get lost, dude. Like, and I felt bad about it, but it's also like, that's like a fight or flight response right there. Cause that's just a safety concern. But like, that's the kind of thing that people will do when they're like that excited about your,
Yeah, no.
and people have like shaken my lift before, like standing like, hey, 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 like, and I'm like,
Ugh.
yeah, what? And they're like, excellent work. I'm like,
Really?
Like, thanks. Like,
Go to my
you
Instagram and
know?
send me a DM, and
Yeah. It's like,
I'll maybe never see it, but
yeah.
you
I mean,
look
Or
real good.
that's
or
just
wait till
so
you take a
challenging.
break.
It is so challenging to deal with, and a lot of times, I feel like right, like in my reaction, but even if I'm right in my reaction, like I still have to deal with that, you know? And
Mhm,
so
mhm,
I can't just flip out on everybody who violates my personal space.
mhm.
Alas,
It's
you know?
it's part of it. No, no, no. I
Yeah.
can relate, and I think some other artists will relate too, especially if they do plein air painting
Mhm.
outdoors, where
Mhm.
you'll have people just sneaking up to you and just
Mhm.
taking photos while you paint outdoors,
Mhm.
and you're like, "Where the hell did you come from?" And not
Mhm.
only do they ask some of the same questions you did, the offending one, the one that I find the worst out of all of them, is
Mhm.
when they pull out the phone and say, "I have a niece, nephew, neighbor,
Mhm.
cousin, grandkid, whatever it is. Let me show you they make art too," and they just start flipping through hundreds of photos on their phone to find the one, and it's
Mhm.
not even that great, and you're just like, "Did I just
Yeah.
waste like, I just lost my painting mojo over you."
Yeah,
And
I don't get
this
that one
oh,
very often. I mean,
thank goodness.
I have had like, yeah, thank goodness. I do have a lot of like, "Oh, I have, I have do you have a card? Like, I have a living room I'd like painted," that kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, like you can email me."
Yeah, cool, whatever.
I don't do shit like that, but whatever. But then like, I have had like younger artists come up and be like, "Will you look at my work?" Like while I am
Oh,
painting, and I'm like, I have to be like, not right now, friend. Like, you know,
I know,
because
I
that's like
know.
miss
Well,
like,
we're
you're just trying to get like, I understand what you're trying to do, but like that's not, now's not the time. Um,
I know.
but yeah, it's like I do get stuff like that, but like the top 10 questions are along the lines of like, how do you do it? Like how do you do that kind of questions? Are you
Mhm,
making a living from this kind of questions? Like how long have you been doing it? How long is it going to take to do it? Like all that those
mhm.
kinds of basic questions. But those are fair questions from people who like don't understand how it works. But like I have it takes all my energy just to be out there, like doing like
Mhm.
putting the work up. Like I just don't have it to have the space to like talk to people. And some people are more outgoing and extroverted and like get a kick out of talking to people, and I envy those people sometimes. But
Are you more of an introvert,
not
Taylor?
Archer.
Yes.
Yeah,
Introverted, but you can talk about art.
yeah. Well, I actually really don't like talking about my art. It's an interesting paradox. Like on in this context, it's great, but it's like,
In general.
what are you working on lately? I'm like, oh, can we talk about like anything else?
Yeah,
You
you're
know?
like, this then it slowly becomes like a therapy session sometimes too. If you really,
Yeah,
like, were to get into the, like, thick of your work and everything, and you're just so in your process all the time,
yeah.
your casual conversation, you're like, "I don't wanna think about work," like, it is work in a
It
way.
is work. It's like always it's like there's more to life than my art, like there's more to me as a person. Like there's more things that I'm
Mhm.
interested in. The deeper existential questions. Can we talk about that? Like can we talk about like, I don't know, anything else?
Yep.
But I get
Yep.
that like if I can change the subject, I get on like I can get very spirited, but then if it's like, "What? Tell me about your art." I'm like, "Oh God." Like
Yeah. It,
and
it
then
needs to be a little more
and
organic,
then I kind of turn into
essentially.
like a little bit of a shut like I'm just like, "It's fine." You know? Like,
One word answers go
what are you
away.
working on lately? Oh, yeah, a bunch of stuff.
Stuff.
Yeah.
And people ask me because they're interested and because it's kind of sometimes one of the only ways that they know to like it's like the only thing they know about me, so it's like the only thing they know to ask about
Yep.
Mm,
too, because it's like I'm like the artist, like,
right.
and I have to be like I should have some gratitude for that also. It's really annoying.
Yep.
That's just the
Hey,
truth of
yeah.
it, you know?
We
So,
understand. Jackie and I both have public facing studios at ArtSpace, so a lot of these
mhm,
challenges you're discussing, we have them too. I mean, our
mhm,
doors are open and people come in, and a
mhm,
lot of those same 10 questions you were talking about, we get them too, especially if we
yeah,
have something on the easel or on the wall that says work in progress
yeah,
questions. But it's almost like I think the difference is when they're asking you, you're working. When they're asking us, a lot of times we have the door open. Otherwise, we close it. So we're
right,
prepared for those questions and for the educational element of
mhm,
like helping them understand what we do and the value in
yeah,
the art. So that's a little different. That's like, but I've had them where I have my door closed and somebody opens it if I left it unlocked. while I'm painting
Yeah.
with their phone out, and I'm just like, what?
Yes,
Obviously,
that's like a
I won't
boundary. That's a
person them.
boundary issue. I'm like, that's when you like, this is a you problem and not a me problem. Like,
Exactly.
go
That's
go
when I'm
away.
like, I
Yeah.
am so sorry. Please knock on the door. I have to go. Have a nice day. Here's my card. Bye.
Yeah.
But before we keep going on this one, because I definitely love this conversation, I have two things. The first one is, I think this is just a humble suggestion. Big sign with a QR code that says FAQ. And then
That's actually a
if they're
great
flag-
idea. And I
if they're
think I will,
flagging you down,
yeah,
you point to the
point.
big QR code sign, and then
Yeah.
that way those 10 questions they can ask, and it has your contact info, the
Yeah.
official,
Yeah.
and then that way you can send them to that, and you can mime it, like,
Yeah. Like, hey, you have a question? Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, point,
Get
and that
in
way you
there.
don't have to stop what you're doing. You just
Yeah.
point at it and like keep your headphones on. And then the other one is, I don't know. You said you have pretty regular projects coming on.
Mhm.
How do you keep them organized? Do you have any apps or technology or just paper calendar? It's fine, but how do you keep track of all the things that are coming up? I'm thinking, especially since some of them have longer deadlines with
Mhm.
different milestones in them. I know for a lot of creatives, they're like, I just want to paint. I don't want to keep track of what date, what follow up, what email. Like, oh, when do I just start this wall or whatever?
Mhm.
Because commission projects are obviously very, very similar to mural projects in that sense.
Yeah,
So it's
absolutely.
like, how do you keep them organized?
It's a challenge. It kind of just works out. It's rare that I have like two projects that absolutely have to get done in the same at the same time, you know?
Mhm.
Um, and things always get delayed, and actually in a season right now where a lot of my projects that were supposed to fall now like have been delayed for one reason or another.
Mhm.
And so like I have like a big gap of time that I didn't account for. So like, that's just kind of part of the and then of course they're all gonna like, all the delays are gonna get fall at the same time. So like I'm anticipating that. But then you just have to like that's when you just have to declare how it's gonna be. It's like I can do this one this time, I can do that one that time, I can do that one that time. And you try to work with people to get them what they need, but it can't always be. Sometimes you just have to be like, sorry, I was ready to paint it in March, like we said, but you didn't get the permit, so now I'm not available. Like now we have to wait for the next like gap in my schedule, and people are understanding. But like I don't know. I mean, I can work on like maybe three projects at once if I'm in the design phase. Um, and so you just like you know, set meeting times and then
Google
prioritize which
Calendar.
yeah, it's like my notes app has a to-do list on it with bullet points, and then my email, like the great thing is now like people send Zoom invites and it exports straight to my calendar, so like I don't really have
Yep.
to do much there, but I'm just like, okay, well this meeting is coming up first. I got these three projects, but this meeting is coming up first, so I got to work on this one first. It's just kind of like prioritizing. um but yeah, I mean, sometimes I don't even, I'm like, how is it possible that everything seems to just work out? I don't know, like with the
No, this
scheduling.
is good.
It just does.
No, this is perfect. This is good
Yeah.
news for people that might be worried, like, will I be doing 7 murals at once? You don't have to.
Well, you don't
But
have, I mean, you
that
just can't. So you just be like, listen, I've got like, and it's also like clients will sometimes have more like reverence for you if they know that you're busy. So they're like, oh,
Mhm.
like I know you're busy. Like I don't want to blah, blah, but
That's true. And then it's a higher demand too. Like they
yeah.
want the artist that
Mm-hmm.
has a lot of things down the pipeline because
Mm-hmm.
the
Mhm.
perception increases value and does increase the value of it too.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I
I
think
can't do
something that
that
I'm working
without.
towards now is like, I would like to position myself more as somebody who's like a little harder to come by, like the work.
Mhm.
So it's more valuable because I like, you don't want to be everywhere. I mean, there's a
Mhm.
value in being prolific, but it's also like it can get it's like, oh, there's that artist again, like
Mhm.
so if and then people feel like more like they have something of higher value if there's fewer of them around. Um,
No, absolutely.
but
Well,
so I'm
this
thinking
may
about like
lead
a lot
into
about
the
context, like the context in which they work. Because like when you're younger, you're like, I just want to get the bag and like get all as many
Mhm.
projects as possible. But like I'm like, I don't really like now I need to prioritize the context in which that because that creates the story around the work, not just the paint on the wall.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. Well, you may have answered some of that already, but one of the questions we like to ask every guest is, how do you define success as an artist?
Mm.
Sounds like a
Well,
lot of that has to do with being in demand.
Yeah,
and
it's
being
like,
more
well, what are your goals and priorities, and are you meeting them? You know, so it's like, are you doing what you want to be doing consistently? Are you getting the pay that you want? Um, are you like, you know, do you have the name recognition that you want in the market that you like? Are you a local? Do you want to be like really well known locally, or do you want like global projects, you know? And so like if the answer is yes to like most of those questions, then I would say you're successful. Like,
love it.
are you not stressed? Like, are you like, how's your stress? Like, are you sleeping? Like, I mean, I don't know. I like wake up every day and I live at my studio. So like I go do my work and then I take breaks whenever I want. And then I schedule my travel whenever I want to schedule it and or whenever I can, you know? And I do exciting projects and I get paid good money. So like, yeah, I would say I'm successful, but in terms of like global dominance, not successful at all. You know what I mean?
In
So it's like,
progress, in
it just
progress.
depends. It's like, if I'm comparing myself to, you know, Shepherd Fairy, then I'm not successful. But if I'm,
Mhm.
you know, if I'm comparing myself to like whether or not I'm meeting my, like, you know, what my values are and what my priorities are, and if I'm like checking those boxes, then I'm very successful. Yeah.
Yeah, and the freedom of having that independence and choosing how you
Mm-hmm.
spend your time and that flexibility, I know is huge for so many people. And I love pointing out like you get to set your metrics for success.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are setting goals and hitting those goals, then that is how you can gauge your success.
Mm-hmm.
But thinking back to when you first got started on your creative journey, what is one piece of advice that you wish you had heard before you got started on your creative journey?
I think, well, if I'd heard it, I don't know if I would have heeded it or not, but uh, I would say like the piece of advice that I would offer to people who are emerging is like, don't be a slave to your ambition.
Mm.
Um, I think that like when you're young, like when I was a young an emerging artist, I would say I was like very anxious and eager and like ego driven, you know, because I was like hot shit because I was very good at art. I've always been very good at art, and I was like always slightly better than everyone around me, you know? And like I had this like idea that many people carry about like the mystique of like the artist, you know? Um, but I was also like deeply insecure about my work. And looking back, rightfully so, because a lot of it wasn't very good. But like, um, but it was just kind of like I found myself like striving so much for like, gotta get gotta get the bag, gotta get the next project, gotta get paid, gotta get my work out there, gotta get the attention. That I was like not present and not appreciative of the moments that I had like back. And then I look back on now and I'm like, wow, like I was like in my young 20s, like living all over the world and like blah blah blah. And I was like so up my own ass, you know, that I just didn't like I didn't have the appreciation for where I was and what I was doing. And you know, like I get like, you know, once you kind of like loosen up and stop being so protective of your identity as an artist, like the flow starts becoming more easily and like the opportunities start coming to you more. And like you've really got to be like present and social and like a good person. I see a lot of that reflected in some younger artists where they're like, you know, like get bent out of shape if they don't get tagged properly on their like the pictures of their work on Instagram and stuff like that. And I'm like, where's that coming? Like, where's that really coming from? You know, like,
Mhm.
is that like, are you like holding on too tight? And
Mhm.
like, what do you feel like you're going to lose if like a picture of your artwork floats around in the internet without your name attached to it, you know?
Mhm.
Like it's a really like you really have to ask yourself some of those serious like spiritual questions of like what does it actually mean in the end? Like are you like what are you actually focused on? And so I think like focusing on your like always improving the quality of your work, focusing on like thinking of your work as a service because it is. Like you know, I'm like always focused on like doing the best possible work, and now I always focus on like making every project just a little bit better than the last one. Um, but it's not so much anymore about like what's everybody else doing. Like, am I making as much money? Do I have as much attention? Do I have as many followers? Like all of that sort of inconsequential stuff. that just like yields all of this like negative emotion, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like stress that's not like, and stress will kill you. So like you just want to stop being stressed as much as and in as many ways as you can. So
I love that advice, honestly.
mm,
And it's like, it's one we like to repeat, and a lot of other creatives that we've interviewed on the podcast will repeat too. It's like, only person you need to be comparing yourself to is yourself, not
mm-hmm,
others. And it's
mm-hmm,
like focusing on your work, being authentic, like
mm-hmm,
those are some of the more important things to look at,
mm-hmm,
as opposed to how many followers do I have and what's my outward appearing reputation. Because honestly, does it really matter? Like, if the folks that are really hiring you are folks that are, say, placemakers, right? Art
mm-hmm.
consultants, people. Are they the ones that are tagging stuff? Like, not necessarily, but it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. They know about you, they know what they want, and they want you to do something that they can't do. So that
Yeah, that's
the
exactly
others,
right. It's like if your work is good, it speaks for itself. It's out there, and also like people are going to remember you as the person you are too, not just like
mm-hmm,
as the number of projects that you have or the amount of times they appear on Instagram, like with your proper credit or whatever, like, or you know, any of those like kind of
100%.
false metrics of success. Like, I think I remember like some of my biggest regrets in my career are like the times that I was in some place like Miami and working so hard in the rat race to like do work in Miami so that I could say that I did, you know?
Building
And
that resume, the
yeah, it's
hustle.
like, oh, I've painted in my, like, I'm here, I am painting. Because there's like so many artists just like scuttling around trying to get their work on a wall. And I was used to be one of them, you know? And then like one day I was just like, this is ridiculous. Like, I'm not having fun. And like
Mm-hmm.
the whole point of being here is to like engage with other artists. And I'm not doing that because I'm so focused on like, how am I doing? Like, how's my work
Yep.
looking? Am I like, do I have the right project? Do I have like the cred, you know? Um, And I stopped doing that. I was just like, I'm never doing this again because I missed so many valuable opportunities because I was so busy hustling, you know,
Mm-hmm.
opportunities to like get to know people, you know. And so I stopped doing that, and I still go to Miami every year, and I don't work, and I have the best time because you're just like the whole point is warmth and person like being a person and like getting to see people that you don't get to see that you love, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Meeting new people, and the opportunities from that are like tenfold, and they come later, you know. So,
Yeah. And from building those relationships, other projects could come organically. So instead of you hustling for it, if you're focusing on the relationship side of it, then
mhm,
somebody might be like, hey, we love your stuff.
mhm,
You've been in our circle. Do you want to do this project? As opposed to you like, can I have your wall? Can I have your wall? Can I have your wall?
absolutely. And
It's like a
it happened
different
like, you know,
way.
it's like then you're just like you put a wall up in Miami, and then it's just like just another wall in Miami, you know.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Unless it's a, you know, there's certain contexts, there's back to context in which it's valuable to still do. Like there's certain projects in Miami that I would definitely take if I was offered them, but I'm not just going to go like and do something just for the sake of it.
Mhm.
Just to
Um,
put another
mhm.
notch on the belt. But one
Yeah,
of the
and
other
that, and you know,
questions.
like what you said is like it does happen. Like I've had projects pay off just from like being willing to let go of having to prove myself in Miami or anywhere really. Like then and to be like the payoff is going to come later. So like I'm gonna like be myself and be personable and be, you know, whatever. And I would end up with mural projects later in the year from that, you know.
Mm.
Exactly. Exactly. Building relationships, so
And even if
important.
I don't have mural
Um,
projects, I have like like, you know, I like friends all over the world that like I could call on at any time. So it's like it's not just about like putting my name up on the wall ever
yeah.
anymore, you know.
Relationships are a lot more important. But Taylor, one question we like to ask all our guests is, if someone randomly hands you $100, what would you splurge it on or invest in? It has to be something that brings you joy and it relates to your art or business.
Someone just gave me $100. Like, oh man.
Yeah.
Uh let's see. Uh you know, I always like to spend I always like to like learn new things, like new tools or stuff like that. So I would take part of that money and I would probably buy like an online course from somebody. Like I like, you know, like you could go on like Proco or some like website like that and like where artists will make courses and like present their courses. And like I've learned from a couple of different artists that way. And it's like a nice way to like get an insight into their technique and then support them too. So I've done that a couple times and I would probably do that. And then I'd probably just buy more paint
I love that.
I need to
Supporter-
I need new brushes anyway. And so like $50 of that could go, or 50 to $75 could go towards brushes, and like the rest of it could go towards like learning from another artist.
I love that, especially with the education and supporting other artists with your education goes a long way. But thank you so much, Taylor, for being on the podcast today. This has been so much fun. A lot of gems have been shared. But for our listeners, how can they stay in contact with you after they listen to today's episode?
Well, please follow me on Instagram because I need more followers. Gotta have more than my peers.
Yeah. Speaking of success metrics.
Yeah, it's at Taylor White Studio on Instagram. That's pretty much my primary communication. You'll never find me on TikTok.
Never say never.
It won't happen. I'm against it. Religiously against it. So.
Awesome. We'll definitely make sure to link your Instagram on the show notes. Also, would you mind staying with us a few extra minutes?
Of course.
So we can discuss income streams and pricing for a bonus segment for podcast supporters.
Perfect.
Awesome. So for our listeners, if you want to become a podcast supporter, head on over to levelupartist.com to find out how you too can support the podcast, fund our projects, and level up the quality of the content that you are receiving.
And if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at May Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are at Level Up Artists on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.